Hello everybody, it's so lovely to have you with us in the church, even if it's on virtual, and we are in your homes, which is also very, very special. By we, I mean, of course, myself and Gavin Smith, Maureen Rowland-Aiken. It's really good to be together as representatives of this greater community. So we're on the last weekend of our Lenten series, which has been on the Hebrew women. And this weekend, or this week, we're looking at Esther. Michael has preached his sermon on that. And maybe we're going to begin by simply asking, which is the verse, which is the aspect of Esther that struck each of us? Maureen, I know you had something to say on this.
Well, it was just before we went on air, I think we were sharing this, is that God is not specifically mentioned in the book of Esther. But in actual fact, God is there in just about every verse and every action. God's faithfulness, salvation for the people, all of those things, I think they are very prominent. And therefore, I think we have to take this book in the context in which it was written.
What's very meaningful for me, given our context, with this, the virus, and I'm sure many people are feeling afraid and alone, was the context of the people then as well. And I actually like the way God isn't specifically mentioned in that book, because sometimes we might feel as if God is not with us. But the book shows us that God is always with us, and God works to the good in the most flawed people, the most flawed circumstances. God still manages to redeem the situation. And that's my favorite aspect of the book.
I'm very struck as well, isn't it, because God isn't mentioned there, that realization that God doesn't need our belief in order to exist. Yeah. God is real. Our belief just makes us aware of, what would we call it, a divine providence at work, so that we can choose to cooperate or not to cooperate. So there's a real sense in which the divine has allowed something of that almightiness to be shared with us, so that we have a power to co-create. I find that always extraordinary, that God believes in us, believes in us enough to actually want to share whatever God is doing. And that's extraordinary. It really is very special. What about that lovely verse where Mordecai, her uncle, so we're talking about an orphan girl here, and her uncle says to her, maybe you have been created for such a time as this. Maybe God got you chosen as royalty so that you could have some sort of influence. Is there a sense of how this could be working for us today?
Michelle,
absolutely.
Yes.
Sorry,
Marina,
go ahead.
That really strikes me as well. I mean, I think here both of us are quite excited to respond to this, because in my personal life, the way I can best relate this sort of experience is how God cares about us. I remember holding my firstborn baby, and she didn't know I existed, and I loved her with every fibre of my being. I think that's what God is like. And Esther was very brave in this context that you mentioned, because she said, I might get killed, terrible things might happen to you, but I will choose to honor what I'm being called to do. And she did. And of course, in this instance, it worked out, but that's not really the point. The point is she made herself available to God, and God worked to the good, and I really believe God always does do that.
I think that's what I was thinking as well, her availability.
Yeah.
Because in actual fact, if you think about it, up until the time when Mordecai approached her and said, this is your time. If you do not rise to the occasion, then the Jewish people could be annihilated. Then it was almost like Mordecai was the one who presented the option of salvation in a way. But she was obedient right from the very beginning. And I think that's something we need to know for ourselves, especially at this time, that we remain obedient. We remain obedient to the word. We rely on the promises of the Bible. We rely upon what Jesus did and said, and to just know, to have that certainty that in the end, God will never let you down.
I think for me what also struck me, and both of you have implied it, is that Esther didn't fulfill the vocation of her life on her own. There were people around her. Mordecai was one of the primary things, of course, but also she had maidservants. And we know that she didn't go into approaching the king and making this request without preparation. She had 3 days of fasting and prayer. And I wonder how often we try to do the will of God in our own strength, as opposed to, and that means even living as a family now as we go into shutdown, or as we go into lockdown, should I say, how many of us are going to just assume we know how to do this? We haven't done this before. And how many of us are taking the time and making the effort to prepare for this so that we're available for God? Yes, I mean, Esther's is a lovely dramatic example, and she's a queen, and so we think she has power and influence. But the truth is we all have power and influence, even if it is in our little context, and our context might be very small and under tremendous constraints. It might be in a backyard cottage, it might be in a township, in the suburbs, but that is our little kingdom, our little queendom, our little part of the world. And we have influence there. And how are we preparing for God to use us in our availability? Maybe we won't fast for 3 days and pray, maybe we will. Whatever it is that Holy Spirit convicts us to do and be has power if it is done in consultation with God, in collaboration with the people that God has put with us as well. I don't know if you want to comment on that as well.
I think that we, at this time, in our context, many of us are feeling inadequate. Will we be able to stay the course? And we need to remember that even though she was much loved, if that's the right expression, certainly much admired by the king, and he chose her to be his queen, she was very fearful. If you remember, she actually said to Mordecai at one point, despite my standing, I cannot just go to the king and ask this of him. You know, I could be killed for doing that, by going to the king without actually having been bidden. So that fear will never go away from us. But we need to know that our king is actually bidding us all of the time, imperfect though we are, inadequate though we are. God is God all the time.
Yeah, what strikes me as well is how imperfect the king is, how capricious he is. He has these drunken swings and moods. And Esther is so calm and prayerful, as you said, Michelle. That's what touches me. And she approaches him in a way that allows the good in him to shine through. Even in him, God can work through anyone and everyone. And as we're in shutdown now, I feel, as you said, each of us is responsible for the influence we have on those around us. And we can work to the good, and we can make this an opportunity for our families to grow closer to God, for us to have quality time, and to turn this into something beautiful, like a retreat, as opposed to a jail sentence. I think that's the invitation for me.
And it's interesting, isn't it, as we look at the story again, that sense that up until this approach, so that the Jewish people could take up arms when the soldiers came to obliterate them, that up until then, Esther had not disclosed that she was Jewish. So she already knew that there might be some sort of negative comeback to that. And I wonder what disclosure God is asking us to make to ourselves, maybe even a truth that we've got to face to ourselves. Maybe we even need to be honest enough to own that the people that are going to stay on the front lines, the medical staff, the banking staff, the people working in grocery stores, the truth is their lives are on the line. You know, how many of us are pretending they're immortal, this doesn't affect them, or we're not even thinking about it? And we need to actually own that so that we can recognize the real gift they're giving to us of their very lives.
I think we also need to recognize the fragility of our environment as we go forward. And again, Gavin, we were talking about this earlier. People are going to be living very close together, spending more time than they normally do spend together, husbands and wives, children and parents, whatever. And remembering that Haman was only good for the time where he's actually doing what the king wanted him to do. And again, even Esther, she was really only good for as long as she pleased the king. So we need to realize that our environment is going to be very fragile going forward, and we really need to be kind to ourselves and to be kind to the people we are going to be sharing this space with.
This sounds like a good note to end on. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for joining in the conversation. And as you gather, it's not completed. Continue talking, engaging, wrestling, read the whole book. It is a joy to have spent this time with you.